There were many heroes from all branches of the service in World War II, and this slideshow describes the exploits of three of them. They were the aviators Francis Kabreski, George H.W. Bush, and Jimmy Doolittle, along with their warbirds. Francis Gabby Kabreski flew P-47 Thunderbolts in Europe and F-86 Sabre jets in the Korean War. George Bush flew a Grumman Avenger torpedo bomber in World War II's Pacific Theater, and Jimmy Doolittle led a raid on Japan flying a B-25 Mitchell bomber. A B-25 and the Grumman Avenger that still fly can be seen at the American Air Power Museum in Farmingdale, New York. More details on the museum are provided in the epilogue. Gabby Kabreski was in the U.S. Army Air Force when Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941. During World War II, he shot down 28 German planes and was also a prisoner of war for 10 months in Germany. In the Korean War, he flew F-86 Sabre jets, shooting down 6 Russian MiG-15 jets. This was the American Air Power Museum's P-47 Thunderbolt. The P-47 was one of the top fighter planes of World War II. It was effective in high-altitude air-to-air combat and also as a fighter-bomber in its ground attack role, bombing and strafing enemy targets. Kabreski's principal mission was to protect American bombers from attacks by German fighter planes as the bombers flew to their targets. During these missions, he also took part in bombing and strafing enemy ground facilities. Kabreski is being congratulated on his 28th kill, tops for American aviators in Europe. Shortly after, he was scheduled to fly home, where preparations were being made for his wedding. He was packed and ready to fly home on an Army transport when he stopped by group operations and was told an escort mission to Germany was planned. On impulse, he volunteered to fly one last mission, which is exactly what it proved to be. While flying this escort mission, he saw a German bomber on an airfield below and decided to strafe it. In doing so, he came in too low, his propeller hit the ground, and forced him to crash land in a farmer's field a few miles away. Here, Luftwaffe officers inspect the crashed plane. Note the 28 swastikas on the fuselage. Kabreski had been unhurt in the crash and was chased by German soldiers after climbing from the cockpit. He managed to avoid capture for 5 days, but was eventually caught and sent to a POW camp. Instead of going on a honeymoon with his new wife, he spent the next 10 months in this German POW camp, Stalag Luft I. Kabreski remained in the service after the war and was given various flying assignments. In 1951, he was sent to Korea for a 1-year tour in the Korean War as an F-86 fighter pilot. During this time period, he shot down 6 Russian MiG-15 jets. He was now an ace in 2 wars, having 5 or more victories in both World War II and the Korean War. This is the base of the 51st Fighter Wing in Korea, where Kabreski was stationed. Returning from Korea in 1952, he received a ticker tape parade in San Francisco and congratulations from President Harry Truman in Washington, D.C. Kabreski retired from the Air Force in 1967 and moved to Huntington, Long Island, where he worked for Grumman Aircraft as a marketing vice president until 1987. He lived on Long Island until his death in 2002 at the age of 83. The burial at Calverton National Cemetery was followed by a reception at the former 56th Fighter Group restaurant located at Republic Airport. The 56th was Gabby's fighter group in World War II, and the P-47s that he flew were built right here by Republic Aviation. In 1991, Suffolk County Airport was renamed Francis S. Gabreski Airport. Our second pilot is George H.W. Bush, who was a 17-year-old senior at Phillips Academy and preparing to enter Yale when Pearl Harbor was attacked. However, shortly after graduation and after turning 18, he joined the U.S. Navy as a naval aviator. He learned to fly Grumman Avenger torpedo bombers and was assigned to fly from the light aircraft carrier USS San Jacinto, where he made 58 combat missions fighting Japanese forces in the Pacific. This is the American Air Power Museum's Grumman Avenger. These planes were equipped with a single 1-ton torpedo or an equivalent payload of bombs. It was the most effective submarine killer and most widely used torpedo bomber of World War II, credited for sinking 30 submarines. It was the largest single-engine carrier-based aircraft of World War II. This shows the Avenger in action. Flying low and slow, it attacked enemy ships and submarines. In addition, it provided close air support, bombing and strafing enemy positions as the Army and Marines fought to recapture Japanese-occupied islands in the Pacific. In September 1944, Bush's 58th mission was to bomb a critical Japanese radio tower complex on the island of Chichijima, about 150 miles from Iwo Jima. On the morning of September 2nd, 1944, George Bush took off from the carrier San Jacinto along with 3 other Avengers and a fighter escort of 4 Grumman Wildcats. Equipped with bombs for this mission, Bush attacked the target. During the bombing run, his plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire, causing serious damage. Knowing he couldn't make it back to the carrier, he realized he and his 2-man crew would soon have to bail out. As shown by this photo, seen by American pilots, it was known that downed flyers would be beheaded and cannibalized by Japanese soldiers. For this reason, Bush had to get away from the island and over the water before he and his crewmen could safely bail out. Once offshore, Bush ordered a bailout. However, his 2 crewmen died in the attempt, and Bush barely managed to safely bail out. Landing in the water, he climbed aboard his 1-man life raft and watched as Japanese motor launchers came out from the shore after him. However, he was saved as they were strafed by U.S. fighter planes supporting the mission. Bush waited in the raft for almost 4 hours with no communication to anyone and not knowing what his fate would be until the USS Finback submarine surfaced near him. Bush was brought aboard the Finback, where he remained aboard for 29 days as the submarine sank 2 ships, tracked and attacked convoys, and survived depth charges from Japanese escort ships. He eventually returned to the U.S., a national hero, entered politics, and in 1989 became 41st president of this country. A few years ago, when the American Air Power Museum's Avenger was at an air show that Bush was attending, he came by to look at the museum's plane and signed his name on the fuselage. And on November 30th, 2018, George Herbert Walker Bush died at the age of 94. George Bush celebrated his 75th birthday with a skydive and did one every 5 years up until his 90th birthday. His words were, "Get out and do something. Get out and enjoy life." Jimmy Doolittle, an aviation pioneer, was born in 1896, 7 years before the Wright brothers' first flight. In high school, he was a champion boxer and an accomplished gymnast. He later became a stunt pilot and test pilot, who also set record-breaking speed flights. He led a daring bombing raid of Japan early in World War II and flew many combat missions in Europe. He received a PhD in aeronautics from MIT and was on active duty with the U.S. Army Air Corps at the time of the Pearl Harbor raid. In 1926, he traveled to Chile to demonstrate the Curtiss P-1 Hawk fighter plane to the Chilean government. Prior to the flight, he broke both ankles while demonstrating his gymnastic abilities. With his ankles in casts, he still managed to complete the demonstration. Back home, he spent a year recuperating from his injuries. At the Cleveland Air Races in 1929, he was scheduled for an aerobatic exhibition that included an outside loop, a maneuver that no other pilots thought possible. In doing it, a wing came off and he had to bail out. He then hopped into another plane and satisfactorily completed his performance. The GB was a dangerous and unstable racing aircraft made by Granville Brothers Aircraft. Doolittle won the prestigious Thompson Trophy race in 1932 with this plane. Also, in 1932, he set a new world land plane speed record flying a GB racer. He noted it had been difficult to control, and later he officially retired from air racing, stating, "I have yet to hear of anyone who engages in this work dying of old age." On April 18, 1942, just 4 months after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Lieutenant Colonel Jimmy Doolittle planned and then led 16 B-25 bombers on a daring and dangerous raid of the Japanese home islands. This is the Air Power Museum's Mitchell bomber, built in 1940 and the oldest B-25 still flying. It was General Hap Arnold's plane during World War II and nicknamed Mishap. The plan was for 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers, each with a crew of 5, to be launched from the carrier USS Hornet when it was 550 miles from Japan. After bombing the enemy targets, the crews would cross over Japanese-occupied eastern China and land in unoccupied China. It had to be done this way, as these land-based planes could not land on an aircraft carrier. As the bomber range had to be increased from 1,300 to 2,400 miles, it required a number of modifications. This included adding fuel cells to increase fuel capacity, removing the lower gun turret, and replacing tail guns with broomstick handles. And for security reasons, the secret Norden bomb sight was replaced with a makeshift aiming device. Here, the B-25 bombers are on the Hornet's deck as they approach the launch point. When 750 miles from Japan, this was 200 miles from the planned launch point, the Hornet was discovered by a Japanese patrol boat. The decision was then made to launch immediately. One bomber, having fuel problems, diverted to Russia, while the remainder completed their attack and continued toward China. However, Running low on fuel and flying in dark and stormy weather, the crews were forced to either crash land or bail out in Japanese-occupied eastern China. Most of the B-25 crews who had reached China eventually found safety with the help of Chinese civilians and soldiers. In the raid, all aircraft were lost, and of the 80 airmen in the attack, 69 escaped capture or death, 8 were captured by the Japanese, and 3 were killed in action. The raid had major psychological effects. In the United States, it raised morale. In Japan, it raised fear and doubt about the ability of military leaders to defend the home islands. Although the raid caused comparatively minor damage, it demonstrated that the Japanese mainland was vulnerable to American air attacks. Doolittle received the Medal of Honor from President Franklin D. Roosevelt at the White House for planning and leading his raid on Japan. He is pictured with President Roosevelt, General Hap Arnold, Mrs. Doolittle, and General George Marshall. At this time, he was also promoted to Brigadier General. Jimmy Doolittle continued to fly combat missions as commander of the 12th Air Force in North Africa, and later commanded the 8th Air Force in England. He died in 1993 at the age of 96 and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery. The American Air Power Museum is located at Republic Airport in Farmingdale, New York. In the museum, that was a Republic Aviation hangar in World War II, you can see where almost 10,000 P-47 fighter planes were built and then flown to nearby air bases. Unfortunately, the crown jewel of the museum, a 75-year-old Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, crashed in 2016. However, a Grumman Avenger and B-25 Mitchell bomber still fly and can be seen at the museum along with many other World War II planes and exhibits.